Good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Mayawa Ogundele, and you're welcome to a Google Hangout for Channels Being on Channels Television. This lovely afternoon, I'm in Lagos, and I also have Chuba Ezekesili. Am I correct? Great. So Chuba is in Lagos. I also have Mr. Tuji Andrews, who is also in Lagos. And this afternoon, we're going to be talking very quickly about oil prices, falling Naira, the Nigerian economy, what is happening 2015, how does this all play out, and of course, we'll talk a little about the coming elections. So Chuba, you were in first, and I'll start with you. Give me a very quick assessment of the Nigerian economy as it is right now.
Yeah, when you're talking about the economy, so let's just look at it the the current occurrences, or at least what's been happening so far with the economy. I think so far with the economy, we have first of all we've had falling oil prices, and that's drastically affected our economy because, of course, the directly correlated a huge portion of a government revenue comes from the price of oil, and that's not just affected the way our budget has come out, but it's also affected our currency. It's going to affect a lot more other factors. So so far, the best way to, I think, predict or at least show what the economy is going is through the budget, right? It's through what the government says. It's where the direction the government is going for the next year. And then if you just take a look at the budget, you have an idea. Even the theme of the budget is something about hope, and I can't recall. It's basically like an austerity budget, but it tells you that not all is well. If all was well, you would not need to go through austerity measures. Austerity measures only take place when the economy is going through a period of through a down period. So I think right now the economy isn't so good. I think that's just my frank assessment of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Andrews, very quickly. So for the layman, I want you to give a quick breakdown of what our budget says right now and how you understand it.
For as we speak, right, it's a 4.7 trillion naira budget. In real terms of it, about 91% is recurrent expenditure. That's including Shopee payments, and 9% of this is capital expenditure. Now, that was explained by the coordinating minister of the economy, and she explained that it had to do specifically with the fact that we might still be able to fund our capital projects by doing some borrowing from the World Bank, African Development Bank. We're speaking with China also to fund some projects which we'll be doing. But now, here's the thing, right? In as much as that has been said, and that is clear to a certain extent, we're in a bit of a situation, right, where crude oil prices are falling, and you know that is what we used to fund our budgets. So crude oil prices as of today are at about $49 per barrel. That means that going by those prices, and also, I need to put this in too quickly. The World Bank released a report on Thursday stating that crude oil prices might fall a little further in 2015. And if that happens, we're expecting that we will not be able to meet our budget benchmark for the year. That means we won't be able to get to the revenue quotas in which we were expecting to get. Now, forgive me for being naive, but if that is what is happening, you would expect that if you know you're not going to make enough money, you should be a bit more realistic and a bit more conservative in your budgeting. But that has not happened. We're still seeing the usual buying of cars, the usual travel allowances. The National Assembly still gets 150 billion in 2015. I mean, you still see all those crazy kind of spending happening in our with the country, or intending to happen. Now, here is the thing that will scare a lot more people. I have been looking at results from the last few years. We have never met revenue quotas in the last 5 years. The the slimmest margin is we've missed it at about 25%, which I mean is not a very good scenario. So you look at that and you look at the fact that that happened during when crude oil prices were above $100, selling at 110, 120. Now that crude oil prices are lower, why should we also put that side by side? Also, I was looking at the medium-term expenditure framework. There's a lot of capital projects which has been allocated for 2015 that are not in the budget. Now that means in realistic terms, our budget is roughly about 6 trillion. That is outside what was put in the real budget that you and I were able to read. But if you check what is in the medium-term expenditure framework, we have things like the east-west road being put into that consideration. We have some dams that are going to be made that are not put into the budget. So we're roughly going to be spending about 6 trillion, and we are not going to be able to make that money now. Where we're going to get the excess from is going to be borrowing. We've been doing that consecutively for the last 2-3 years, and we're going to do it again. This is not very.
Hello? Okay. I think Mr. Andrews may be having issues with his internet. I'm not sure if he's still there, but it seems frozen at the time. Okay, so while we wait, Shuba, let me quickly come over to you. Does this mean, I mean, from everything Mr. Andrews has just said, does this mean we're working into a ditch blindly? Or I mean, if we don't expect to meet our revenue quota, if we're going to spend a lot more, if we're not making so much, we're going to be borrowing so much. Where are we heading with all of this?
I mean, according to the government, they're being very optimistic. This is what I said. I wrote a post breaking down the budget. I said we're being very optimistic, and it's just as he said. We're thinking that we can meet revenue targets. We're thinking that we're probably even hoping that oil price is going to, increase. But these things are most likely not going to happen. Whenever you make scenarios, right, what you usually typically should do is take the worst case scenario, right, and then work around it. Okay, you ensure that you make sure that you're putting contingency plans around your worst case scenarios. That way, even if your worst case scenario comes to pass, you have the ability to weather it. And then if it's a better case scenario, then you're still good. But when you start from the optimistic side of things and you say to yourself, you know what, things can be good. We can actually accrue this level of revenue, from taxation, from MDAs, and from other government parastatals, and then you tell yourself that yes, somehow it's going to work. Then you're heading towards a ditch, which is exactly what he was saying. So in the long term, it's not. It's first of all that's bad. Second of all, the composition of the budget makes it even scarier, because when you look at what Andrew was saying, it's 91% recurrent and then about 9% capital. Now consider that if you're taking all that money, right, is going only just into essentially maybe debt payments and funding of salaries and overhead costs, right? That's actually not. That's in the long term. That's not good for the economy, or in fact, even in the short term or in the medium term, it hardly benefits the economy, because what you need are capital expenditures. But if in the instance that your austerity cuts down on capital while yet recurrence is growing, then in the long run your economy can't succeed. Your economy can't go far, because the minus one bridge, minus one dam, minus one school, minus one hospital, your economy is not growing. So you're gathering debt, but at the same time you have an economy that is staying stagnant, or at least even declining.
Well, rather interesting and unfortunate if if that eventually plays out. But as it is, do you see any perhaps political hands at play here, seeing in the light of the fact that this is 2015, next month we have the elections, and you probably don't want to be laying off workers at this time. Do you see that?
Yes, of course. I mean, of course, it's normal. I mean, this is typical across the world. The worst time that politicians make policies, right, especially tough policies, is usually during election times. That's when no politician wants to make the tough calls during election time, because it could mean their head. it might be the smart choice, but it's politically the wrong choice to make. So what they're simply doing is they're making the politically right choice, but the economically bad decision, choice. So what you end up having is that you can't start laying off workers now. I mean, the government is the highest employer of labor in Nigeria. Like, take it or leave it. The government employs, I can't even imagine, thousands of people, or millions, in fact. So you start laying off workers, all of a sudden you have an issue on your hand, especially if you're thinking of getting into the government in the second term. So it's unfortunate, but that's kind of the situation that we're in. People don't make tough choices in election periods.
Interesting. So now because at the end of it all, I think, of course, the economy we have to consider, but people also want to understand, because at the end of the day, everything still boils down to the people, how it affects
Yes.
their lives, how it affects their businesses, entrepreneurs, and all of that. So let's imagine for 1 second that our worst nightmares come to be. What is that going to, tell on the people? What is going to happen to the people?
You're asking how it
What should
directly
the
affects.
average, exactly, how is this going to affect the average Nigerian on the street?
I mean, the average Nigerian on the street is probably. I mean, when you look at, when at the end of the day, right? When you look at what it means to be in debt, right? It means you have not just less money, but you have even lesser money, right? So tomorrow, for example, were we to say that education, or at least we needed to fund uh, healthcare in Nigeria, we don't have. Why were you going to have the money to do that? You don't fund healthcare. That means less hospitals for you. That means less doctors that get paid. It means less nurses. It means less facilities. Now that directly affects you, because tomorrow you get in an accident, you're in trouble. And then the only choice you have to is go to a private hospital, and we know how expensive private hospitals are in Nigeria. So all of a sudden, right, you're seeing that direct effect. You're looking at it from the education perspective. You don't put effort into your capital expenditure, because most of the money has gone into recurrent, and because you can't even afford it, or even if you can afford it, you have to borrow. What ends up happening is that it's what you call like a crowding out effect. You start reallocating money that should have gone into productive ventures into paying your debt off. Because the thing about debt is, in particular, is that a debt, right, never stays constant. Your debt increases every single day you don't pay it back. So the longer you wait, the worse it gets. Now you're borrowing more while you're taking longer to pay off your current debt. It's a cycle that just keeps getting worse. So what ends up happening is that most of the money that you're supposed to take into paying for necessary things, you're taking it to paying debt. Now that has zero zero net benefit for the people. So all that money you're seeing, right, goes in. All that money you're seeing that would have gone into education, that would have gone into healthcare, that would have gone into infrastructure, they're gone. I mean, for example, now I was talking to someone that works with I mean, and then it also has effects on other industries. That's what happens, because once you have these things, you have multiplier effects. I'll give an example. I was talking to last week when I was in Abuja. I was talking to a friend that works with Julius Berger, and he was talking about how they're actually thinking of laying off a lot of people. Why are they thinking of doing that? Because of course projects are not coming in. I mean, they've projected for next year, and they've seen that there's hardly any project. I mean, you look at a 9% capital expenditure. There is hardly. Most of the money comes from there. Most of the money comes from, of course, government contracts. You have to build a bridge, you have to build a road, those sort of things. Now you have less money to do that. Of course, it means less money for them, and so it means they have to start laying off workers. They have to start laying off workers. Of course, what other workers are they going to lay off other than Nigerian workers? So essentially, right, it's a cycle. It's a cycle that has other unintended effects. Now, the more, I mean, you think about like the construction industry and how much it employs, people start laying off in that industry, it starts affecting other areas. The more people you lay off, of course, they now have less money to spend on the economy. Less money they have to spend on the economy, it also affects the next person. If today a contractor cannot afford agege bread because he's not getting paid, tomorrow a agege bread person is not going to be afford to plait her hair because she's not getting paid. You see how these things always run their cost through the economy in a negative way.
Okay, so how soon, I mean, all this is just assuming our worst nightmares come to be. How soon will all these things happen? Are we looking at this year, or are we looking at next year?
I mean, we're looking at this year to next year. I mean, and the thing with the economy is everything's usually a lot of things lag. some things happen and then you don't feel the effect until much later on. But I mean, the instance I was talking about in the case of Julius Berger is happening this year. So I mean, people are going to get laid off, and it's not going to be next year. It's going to be this year because every company, every organization is looking at current costs. They're looking at they're projecting into the future and saying, you know what, if we're only making this amount and we have this amount of cost, how can we make profits out of this? So those effects start from now. They start from now and then they go on into the future. And the thing is, they cascade into the future. So of course now is of course it will be a bit better, but into the future it gets worse.
Okay, so very quickly, because I also want us to talk about the oil price as well as the foreign reserves, which just jumped up recently a few days ago. But before we go into that, now we've tried to imagine what will happen should our worst nightmares come to be. But on the flip side, what if, as the government is hoping, what are the scenarios that could come to play if indeed things turn out positive?
Yeah, I mean the scenarios that could possibly happen for things to be positive, right? It would be first of all, oil prices go back up. Now, as Chinji was saying, World Bank just came out with that and saying that it's actually going to decline. I mean I don't see it just coming back up. Maybe sometime in the future, possibly. But you have what you call an oil glut. You got shale oil from the US, you got other countries, finding oil, and then OPEC is not as strong as it used to be because, of course, its shares has declined. Most other people are now big boys too when it comes to producing oil. So what you then end up saying is that in that scenario is a bit unrealistic now, at least within 2015. It's difficult for me to say that oil prices are going to rise back up. And in the first place, no one should bet their economy on something as feeble or as fickle as oil prices coming back up or not. The economy should be stronger than that. If you have to say, you know what, we're tossing a coin to see if it happens, then you're putting a lot of people's life in trouble. Now, the other scenario for things to be positive, right, is that the government can, of course, generate enough revenue to support the budget. But in the first place, as we're saying, you're looking at a government that has fallen, short of the target of its revenue generating target several times. In a couple of years, it's going to be very difficult. Maybe perhaps this year it's going to be different because there's fire in the mountain, so you have to, of course, be more serious about how you take things. But it's hard to see that happen. It's hard to see that happen. If the efficiency is always, in writing, it's always easy to say, but in terms of being realistic, these things are so much harder to work out. So it's difficult to see that happen. The third thing, of course, is that, okay, how can you be positive? But you can't have, the truth is, you're putting all that, even if you were to generate revenue, right? Even if the government was to be able to fund the budget, you're putting it into a budget that's sucking in a lot of recurrent cost. Recurrent cost, at the end of the day, really does nothing for the economy. That's just the truth. Of course, it funds a lot of things, it pays off our debts, but overall, in the long term or in family term, it's not beneficial to the economy. You buy sweets and biscuits, and you buy that and you have it, and that's it. It's done. The effect is hardly, the effect is hardly long lasting, or hardly ever benefits most other people. But now, capital expenditure is like your mom paying for your school fees. You don't get the money directly. It doesn't come into your pocket, but the effect is so much more long lasting, and it also affects so many other people in the future.
Okay, great. So people want to understand why, if you have falling oil prices all over the world and pump price has gone down in so many countries, what is happening in Nigeria? People want to understand that.
What's happening in Nigeria is that we're not running. What we have is a subsidy system set in place. So you're not running a direct system. You're not running a market system where the price of oil is directly comes down to the price in the pump when you go to buy gas. So of course, when you think back to the past years, when oil prices were high, you were paying, of course, a lower price for oil because of the subsidy was there. So it's not surprising that now that it's even down, you're still paying whatever price you're paying until you remove subsidy, you can't have that are going down to below $2 now, because why? They're tied to it. If tomorrow the price of oil was to skyrocket to $200 per barrel, the US would feel it, because Americans would pay a lot more. Americans would pay 8, 10. So they feel it directly, because it's direct. It's a direct correlation. We're not banking on subsidy. Subsidy drives a wedge in between the real market price and what you pay in the gas station. So I think it's always important for people to realize that, until we say that we're completely taking out subsidy, then you can't have that reduction in oil price as people would desire.
So long and short is Nigerians shouldn't expect to be paying any less for fuel at this
Yeah,
time.
I don't think so. No.
But I mean, just to ask, if the government decides to remove the subsidy totally at this point in time, will people feel it? Because what happened, that was in 2012, was that people didn't want to pay so much for fuel if we were producing as a nation. But if the subsidy is removed at this time, would there be any such effect?
Will there be any such effects on what exactly?
Like, will people have to pay so high for it?
Would you have to pay so high
For
for
fuel?
No, I mean, fuel prices have gone. I mean, the market price has gone down. I mean, at least the global price has gone down. So I don't think you're going to have to pay. You're not going to pay as high as what we're meant to pay, at least in back then, when we had the oil subsidy brouhaha. It's going to be, of course, lesser, because, I mean, as I said, in the US, the prices have gone down, because, of course, theirs is directly correlated to it. So once prices go down globally, and you're tied without a subsidy, of course it's expected, the same thing is expected to happen within the country too.
So perhaps this is a good time to actually remove the subsidy like the federal government wanted to do. But thank God we have Mr. Andrews. He's back with us. Hello? Hello, Mr. Andrews.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Oh, it's good to have you back. So we've said quite a lot in your absence, but
I could guess, yeah.
I guess that was your internet.
No, it wasn't. It's just hardware issues with my tablet.
Oh, okay, great. So if you would please just position your tablet so we
Aha,
can
you
see
see
your
what I
face
mean?
well.
Okay. Aha. We're back.
Okay, but we still can't see your face. So much of your face, like half your head is gone.
Can see me now, right?
Okay, this is better. So
Okay.
would have to just take it back a few notches. We were talking about, what were we talking about again? We're
We're
talking
talking about
about
crude oil
the economy.
prices.
Yo, well,
Yeah.
that was with Chuba, but now we have to backtrack a little for you. But because
Okay.
before you went off the anger, we were talking about the budget, and you were telling me about how Nigeria hasn't achieved its revenue target in the past 5 years.
Yeah.
And I also remember that I was discussing with Chuba about what the worst could possibly be if our nightmares come to be, what the effect will be on the average Nigerian, and how soon will we start to feel these effects. But of course, I know that there's a level of effects that people are already feeling because prices have jumped up. People already complain about prices of goods and services that have gone up.
Okay, yeah, the effects are going to be seen in, they're already being seen, actually. Most people just do not know that they are connected. We saw that in December, 22 states of the Federation were owing salaries. That's at December 25th. 22 MDAs were owing, state governments were owing their staff salaries. Between that time and the first Monday of January, 11 had paid, so there were still 11 owing. As I know that of today, 3 states are still owing, and those ones have been owing for about 2-3 months or so. Now, here is the thing, right? Those states are states that are heavily dependent on crude oil revenue from the government, and if they do not get this revenue, it's almost likely they might not be able to pay salaries. So we've started to see the effects happening on the economy, and then in things of the fact that we're a very import-dependent economy in terms of that has to do with issues around devaluation and the pressures of the Naira. But generally, the major case we would start to see is that the government is going to, you know how it is when water always finds a way out of any trapped vessel it's in. The government seems to be determined to spend. I need to put that out there. The government is determined to spend. So the issue is not how much revenue we have. It is where we are going to get the money to spend from. You get. So we're going to see a lot of borrowing. Then the effects would generally go on things like inflation, monetary policy controls. So we might see the effects turn down to more tightening. We might see the dollar. We will see the dollar devalued again within the next 2-3 months. Analysts say 200. I am a bit reserved and conservative, and I would say we'll devalue to 186 naira. That's the official benchmark, and it will now be trading at about 200 naira. So I mean, the effects are widespread on everybody. It's going to reach us the amount, the price of cars, the price of shoes, the price of food, the price of your cereal, the price of your tablets, your electronics. Everything is going to go up, and there's going to be less money to spend. So we're generally going to see prices go up. It's something that worries you, and you know that the people managing the economy can also see this, but the fact that they're not saying anything worries me even more, to be honest with you.
So what should be done really? Because this is a pretty scary picture that we've painted on the Hangout today. What should be done?
What should be done is, first off, we're looking at, we should have cut down salaries. I want to point out something to everyone. I have been looking at the budget draft, the 2015 budget draft. Now, I followed the budget year on year, and I know the figures almost by heart. Now, for the Ministry of Power, in 2013, it was 56 billion, I think. In 2014, it was 64 billion. And in 2015, it's going to be 8.8 billion. Now, I want that to sink for a minute. 56, 64, then 8. That is a drop in revenue, a drop in expenditure, right? And that is because we unbundled PHCN. The government sold PHCN. So we have less salaries to pay. Now, what the government is doing is, even though the government is still spending a lot managing Transmission Company of Nigeria, that's the TCN, but the government has left the issue of power distribution and generation in the hands of the private sector. And what the government is doing in that area is simply regulation. That is what we should do across board. We should scrap the Ministry of Aviation and the Ministry of Roads. I mean, I don't see why we should have two separate entities who are doing the same thing. We should just have one Ministry of Transport, and their major duties should be in regulation, not in administration. They should be in regulation. And if we're able to cut down, because if you look at it, 4.7 trillion naira, almost a little above 3 trillion is for salaries. We can't continue to do that as an economy and expect to move forward. We need to spend more money on infrastructure, on things like power, on things like roads, so that people who have... Now, I want to point out something. One of the major achievements of this government is that we have reduced our wage, food importation bill. And most people cheer about that. And I see it as quite ridiculous, because we have never been a country short of food. We have just been a country that has not been preserving what we produce. About 50% of what we produce year on year goes to waste. Why does that happen? Generally because we do not have proper storage facilities. And when somebody produces, maybe say tomatoes in the outskirts of maybe Borno State, for him to get that tomatoes from Borno State to the central market in maybe Lagos takes him a bit. And the roads are bad, before he gets it over there, most of it is spoiled, rotten, or most of it is lost. That is the issue we've been having around food production in Nigeria, not the fact that we do not produce enough food. So when you look at scenarios like that, you generally see that if we want to grow our economy, because agriculture has been one of the biggest contributors to GDP for the last 20 years. It was the biggest until we rebased recently. if we want to support things like agriculture, we need to make roads so that an emeka somewhere in Enugu producing tubers of yam, or a Sule somewhere in wherever is producing tomatoes, can be able to bring it into the markets with little resistance. We need to get the trains working. We need to get power so that more people can start producing in the country, and we'll be able to export a lot more things, and we'll have foreign revenue from those activities. But as it is, the federal government is not thinking in that direction. The federal government is thinking of taxing. The federal government is thinking of widening its tax base. The federal government is thinking of giving a larger target to the Nigerian customs and the Nigerian and the Federal Inland Revenue Service. So you see, those are the issues. But for me, cut down cost of governance. In fact, or slice it down 50%, if not more, and then support industry. That way, we would have a country that can run itself outside the government.
Mr. Andrews, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, you mentioned taxing, and I get the impression that the government is trying to raise money from the people.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
You ask the question, why? Why the people? I mean, you've not really given them anything. We woke up to stories of people being displaced from Baga as of today, and as sad as a story as that is, you want to ask what kind of protection those people are getting. Imagine if you go to those people and tell them, you guys need to pay your taxes. I mean, you know how ridiculous that is going to sound. As someone has just lost a woman has just lost her husband, or maybe a child, or maybe even two children, and then you're coming to them and tell them you guys need to pay taxes. Those are the issues we're having. The people of Nigeria tend to create their own electricity, create their own security, create their own water supply, and basically even fix their own roads. I mean, the road to my place in Lekki, I mean, Lekki is one of the most expensive places in Lagos. I mean, next to parts of Ikoyi. It's one of the most expensive places, and you can imagine the kind of roads I go through after we veer off the major tarred road or the major paved road into the suburb corner where it is. The road there is not exactly good. So you kind of question the issues and say, what exactly is the government doing for me? Yet it wants to get taxes from me. I don't know. I wouldn't say I want to pay taxes, but I would just say, for me, it's a big ask. It's a big ask.
That's interesting. And I'm also wondering where the money will come from, since people have very little to spend. I mean, if prices are going up, not to forget that school fees will not go down. I'm really worried and concerned right now.
Well, you know, one thing you have to effectively.
Hello? Oh, not again. Okay, Chuba, I've been meaning to ask you this. We don't have so much money. We're going to be taxed, and we don't have so much money to even spend. Can we borrow our way out of this? Is it possible that the Nigerian government will somehow borrow its way out of this, borrow money to build roads, borrow money to, invest in businesses, borrow money to fix unemployment, and then maybe some other time it starts paying off? Is this possible? Okay, yeah, take that again because I just unmuted you.
Yeah, we are planning to borrow. It's just we're not planning to borrow for the right reasons. We will borrow, but as Tunji was saying, is government expenditure, at least government overhead costs and salaries, then you have trouble. That's what's going to happen. We are going to borrow, and we're going to borrow. Scares me, and I think scares Tunji also.
But will it work? Will borrowing work somehow?
Is that if we borrowing only? I mean, borrowing is not borrowing is in itself, right, is an issue, but it's not even the big issue. It's also, what are you borrowing for? For example, right, a firm borrows, a company borrows to expand its factories, right, across another nation, or at least across the country. Now that's smart borrowing, because you know that eventually those factories will start gaining revenue, and then you can pay back what you're owing, and then you can start making profit off it. Now, that's different from if a firm borrows to host a party. There's no revenue gained from hosting a party. I mean, the money is spent, and that's it. It's gone. And it's essentially the same thing you have when you borrow to fund recurrent costs. Because what ends up happening is you're borrowing to just pay salaries, and that's it. It's paid. It's over. And then all of a sudden, you're still stuck with the same bad roads that you have. If you're borrowing to fix the road, if you're borrowing to fix power, then it's different because there's something that's changed. And those things that have changed have a way of becoming, those things have what you call multiplier effects. You know, if, for example, we're to take the case of power, as Tunji was saying, and now food products get spoiled. The day you were to fix electricity in Nigeria, right, and food products were less likely to get spoiled, that day you'd have multiplier effects because people then gain revenue, you know, and then people can open more businesses, and then more people are getting paid, and then you can even tax those people that are getting that more revenue, and then what's going on. But in the instance, right, that you're spending, or most of your borrowing is going into non-productive ventures, right, like just paying for salary, then it's hard to see how that's going to lead to any growth in the economy. So borrowing, I think itself is not even the issue. It's what we're borrowing for. Our budget shows that we're borrowing for recurring cost, not capital, and that's even scarier.
All right, thank you, Chuba. Welcome again. So, Mr. Andrews, I'm just going to ask you the same question I asked Chuba, and we'll close on that note because it looks like we can go on and on and on about this. Can we borrow? Is it possible that borrowing will somehow work? Can the Nigerian government borrow its way out of this situation?
Here's the thing, right, with borrowing. There is a level to which you borrow to. For instance, we can see cases with Greece. Greece at some point needed bailouts, and it wasn't, when you say you want to borrow, it's about who is going to give you the money you want to borrow. And let me paint a scenario for you. We spent about 33 billion defending Naira in 2014. Now, as of today, let me rephrase that. As of Monday, news was that we had 34 billion in the foreign reserves. Now, if we spent 33 defending the Naira in 2014 and we have just 34 billion in as of today, and we're not going to have any significant extra revenue coming in, chances are that our foreign reserve might be seriously depleted under 10 billion in 2015. So it gets to the point where everybody starts to look at you and say, okay, how are you going to pay back? It's not about how you want to borrow or what you want to borrow. So right now, what you start to hear is countries will start to give you higher interest rates and say, okay, I used to take 5% before, but now I'm not really sure you can pay back. So you're at risk. So I'm going to take it at 7% or even 7.5%. And that starts to, go around in the international communities, and we start to have issues with collecting those loans. But as it is, we cannot borrow out of it. What borrowing does is that it just pushes the problem forward at a higher cost. You understand? And we can't borrow our way out of it. Simply, just to answer you that question in a simple way, we cannot. It's not possible.
Well, we're here and we'll be waiting for what happens next, what the federal government will do, and especially see what will play out after the elections, because I know that is one major factor in all of this. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining this hangout. It's been wonderful. I'm usually not the economy type, but I've enjoyed this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So we'll wrap it on that note. Thank you, Chuba, and thank you, Tunji. Thank you so much. This hangout is over, but of course the discussion continues on Twitter. You can tweet at Channels Beam and let us know your thoughts. Thank you very much. I am Mayowa Ogundele. Have a nice day.